Jack had always been ready for any mission. He was a soldier, trained for the worst. His mission this time was different, though. He had been sent to investigate an abandoned alien ship. It was a huge vessel, drifting silently in deep space. The mission was supposed to be simple: find out why the ship had gone off course and report back. But Jack had no idea how much more complicated things were going to get. The ship was like nothing Jack had ever seen before. It was enormous, with strange, smooth walls that shimmered faintly in the low light. The ship seemed empty at first. There was no sign of life, no crew, just cold metal and abandoned hulls stretching in every direction. Jack made his way through the dark corridors, scanning his surroundings. His footsteps echoed in the empty space, the only sound in the vast silence. As Jack moved deeper into the ship, he began to wonder what had happened to its crew. There was no sign of anyone, no bodies, no signs of a struggle, just abandoned technology. It didn't make sense. This ship had been in service not long ago, according to the last communication. Something had gone terribly wrong. Jack reached a large chamber that seemed to be a control room of sorts. As he stepped inside, he stopped dead in his tracks. In the middle of the room, standing motionless, was an alien woman. She had pale skin that glowed faintly, and her eyes were wide and bright like shimmering stars. She didn't look threatening, but her presence was unsettling. Jack had never seen anyone like her. Her features were unlike any human he had encountered before. Her face was delicate, her ears were pointed, and her long, silver hair seemed to flow like a river. Jack's hand instinctively reached for the weapon at his side. He wasn't sure if the woman was a threat, but his training told him to stay cautious. However, there was something about her that made him hesitate. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at him with an unreadable expression. It felt as if she was waiting for him to make the first move. "Who are you?" Jack finally asked, his voice echoing in the large room. He tried to keep his tone calm, but there was a tension in his chest. He wasn't used to being caught off guard. But this woman was unlike anyone he had ever met. The alien princess blinked slowly, as though considering his question. Then, in a soft, almost musical voice, she spoke, "I am Lyra." Her voice was clear, and despite its softness, there was an air of authority in it. Jack frowned. "Lyra, what are you doing here? Where is the rest of your crew?" Lyra tilted her head slightly, her eyes never leaving Jack's. "I am alone," she said quietly. "The others are gone." Jack could feel a cold chill run down his spine. Alone, the word echoed in his mind. If this woman was alone on a ship like this, something terrible must have happened. He scanned the room again, looking for any signs of damage or clues. The walls were smooth, unmarred by any signs of battle or destruction. It didn't make sense. "Why? Are you here? How did you survive?" Jack asked, his mind racing. He wasn't sure if this was a trap or if she was the last survivor of something horrific. I was left behind," Lyra answered, her voice breaking ever so slightly. "I am ... I am the princess of my people, but I am no longer needed. I have no future now." Jack felt a pang of sympathy for her, but he didn't understand. Left behind? Why would your people leave you here? Lyra's face twisted with a mix of sorrow and regret. "I cannot give them what they need." "I am infertile." Jack blinked in surprise. "Infertile?" He didn't know how that connected to her being left behind, but the way she said it, with such pain, made it clear it was important to her people. "I don't understand," Jack said, still trying to process the situation. "What does that have to do with being left on this ship?" Lyra's eyes dropped to the floor as she spoke. "In my species, to be infertile means to be ... a failure. We are a species that relies on reproduction to survive. A princess, especially one who cannot bear children, is seen as useless. They could not afford to keep me. I was abandoned here to die alone." Jack took a step forward, his heart aching for her. "That's not fair," he said, his voice soft. "No one should be treated like that." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with a sadness he couldn't fully understand. "It is the way of my people. I had no choice in this matter. I am nothing now." Jack felt a surge of anger, but he quickly pushed it down. This wasn't the time for emotions. He had to focus on getting both of them out of here. We need to find a way to fix this ship and get back to your people, he said firmly. There has to be a way, Lyra shook her head. It is too late for me. My people have already forgotten me. Jack didn't agree. He couldn't stand the idea of leaving her behind in this cold, empty place. We'll figure something out, he said. I'm not leaving without you. As Jack made the promise, he wasn't sure how they would get off the ship or what lay ahead. But one thing was clear, he wasn't leaving her alone. The cold, quiet ship continued to drift through the vastness of space, its lights dim and flickering. Jack stood in the control room, staring at Lyra as she gazed out the large, viewless window. They hadn't said much since their conversation about her infertility, but the silence between them felt heavy, like a thick fog hanging in the air. Jack couldn't help but wonder what kind of life Lyra had led before this. How did someone like her, an alien princess with strange, glowing skin and eyes like shining stars, end up abandoned on a ship, alone in the depths of space? As Jack tried to make sense of their situation, Lyra broke the silence. There must be something you can do, she said, her voice softer now, almost hopeful. Jack turned his gaze to her, noticing for the first time how fragile she looked. She had always seemed strong, regal even, but there was a sadness about her that made her seem smaller. I'll try, Jack said, his voice firm. We'll fix this ship together. We'll find a way to get you home. Lyra nodded, but Jack could see the doubt in her eyes. She wasn't sure if there was a way out of this endless void. Jack didn't blame her. She had been abandoned by her people. She didn't trust anyone anymore, especially not humans. But Jack knew something that she didn't. No matter how bad things got, he wasn't going to leave her behind. The ship's systems were complicated, far beyond anything Jack had ever seen before. It was built for a species with intelligence, far more advanced than humanity's, and the controls were unfamiliar to him. Still, Jack had faced challenges before. He was resourceful and had trained for situations like this. He could figure this out. He pulled up the control panel in front of him, tapping the unfamiliar buttons and screens. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. The ship had clearly suffered some damage, no surprise there, but the lack of response was frustrating. Can you help me? Jack asked, turning to Lyra. You said you know this ship. Can you show me what to do? Lyra looked at him for a moment, then slowly nodded. I know some of the controls. But they are strange, not like anything I've used before. Together, they began to work on the ship's damaged systems. Lyra explained how certain parts of the ship functioned, her voice low as she described the technologies her people used. It was fascinating, and Jack found himself listening intently, even as he struggled to understand. There were moments when Lyra's hands brushed against his as they worked side by side, and Jack noticed how carefully she moved, as though every action was deliberate. He could tell that she didn't want to depend on him, didn't want to rely on a human for help, but she had no choice. They were stuck together on this ship, and she had to trust him, just as much as he had to trust her. Hours passed as they worked, and Jack began to get the feeling that they were getting nowhere. The ship was vast, its systems too complex. Each attempt to fix a part of it only seemed to lead to more problems. But Jack didn't give up. He knew that Lyra was depending on him, even if she didn't say it. Lyra, on the other hand, was beginning to show signs of frustration. She had always been taught to be self-sufficient, to never show weakness. Yet here she was, unable to fix the ship that was supposed to bring her home. The thought of returning to her people, of facing their judgment, made her feel sick. She wasn't sure she could face them, not like this. What happens if we can't fix the ship? She asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack stopped what he was doing and looked at her. Her face was full of worry, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. We'll fix it, we have to. Lyra shook her head slowly. What if we don't? What if I'm stuck here forever, alone? Jack took a deep breath. He didn't know the answer, but he wasn't about to give up. You're not alone, he said firmly. I'm here. We'll get through this together. Lyra met his gaze for a long moment. Her eyes softened, and for the first time since he met her, Jack saw something like hope in them. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Maybe they could make it out of this mess after all. As the hours passed, Jack and Lyra continued to work together, slowly getting a handle on the ship's systems. It was exhausting, but Jack could tell that they were making progress. The ship was still a puzzle, but with Lyra's knowledge and his determination, they were beginning to understand it. After another long stretch of silence, Lyra spoke again. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice tinged with gratitude. Jack looked up at her, surprised. "For what?" "For helping me." "For not giving up on me," she said, her voice soft and sincere. "You didn't have to, but you did. I appreciate it." Jack smiled slightly. "You don't have to thank me. We're in this together." And as they continued to work, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of connection growing between them. He was just a soldier. She was a princess. But in that moment, none of that seemed to matter. They were two people stuck in the same situation, trying to survive. And maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to make it out together. The days blended together as Jack and Lyra continued their work on the ship. The silence of space, the quiet hum of the alien technology, and the endless corridors of the ship became their world. The tension that had initially filled the air between them had started to fade. They had learned to trust each other, and although neither of them said it aloud, they both knew that they were no longer alone. Jack had always been used to working alone. His life as a soldier had taught him to rely on his own strength and skills, but being with Lyra felt different. She wasn't just an alien princess. She was someone who, despite her challenges, was determined to survive. Her intelligence was incredible, and her knowledge of her people's technology was something Jack could never have imagined. Even in the face of uncertainty, Lyra didn't give up, and that attitude inspired Jack more than he expected. Lyra, on the other hand, had always lived under the weight of her royal duties. As a princess, she had been taught to be strong, perfect, and self-sufficient. But being stuck on this lonely ship had forced her to rely on Jack. At first, it had been difficult to accept help from a human, especially someone she barely knew. But with each passing day, her feelings began to change. Jack was patient and kind, never pushing her beyond what she could do, but always encouraging her when she doubted herself. He treated her like an equal, something her people had never done. One afternoon, as they worked on the ship's main engine, Jack noticed Lyra staring out of the window again. The view from the ship was breathtaking, but it seemed to pull her into a world of her own thoughts. Jack, unable to resist, walked over and stood beside her. "Hey," he said softly, "what are you thinking about?" Lyra turned her head to look at him. There was a softness in her eyes now, a change Jack hadn't seen before. "I was thinking about my home," she said quietly, "about the people I left behind and how I'll never see them again." Jack felt a pang of sadness for her. He knew she was trying to be strong, but the pain was evident in her voice. He understood what it felt like to lose something important, to be disconnected from the people you cared about. He wasn't sure what to say, but he knew he had to say something. "You're not alone," he said, his voice steady. "You have me. I won't let you go through this alone." Lyra looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to understand the sincerity in his words. You really mean that?" Jack nodded. "Of course. I promised I wouldn't leave you behind, and I don't break promises." A small smile tugged at the corner of Lyra's lips. It was the first genuine smile Jack had seen from her, and it made his heart lift. "Thank you, Jack," she said softly. "I never thought I would find someone like you. Someone who doesn't see me as just a princess, but as a person." Jack's heart skipped a beat. The way she said it so quietly, so honestly, made something inside him stir. He had always been focused on the mission, but now, with Lyra by his side, things seemed to have changed. He hadn't expected to care about someone this much, but here he was, caring deeply for a person who, just days ago, had been a stranger to him. They both stood there in silence, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Jack didn't know how much longer they'd be stuck on the ship, or if they'd ever make it back to civilization. But one thing was clear. He couldn't imagine being anywhere else but by Lyra's side. As the days passed, their relationship continued to grow. They shared more about their pasts, their hopes, and their fears. Jack told Lyra about his childhood, growing up on Earth, and the soldiers who had trained him to be tough. He told her about the battles he'd fought in, the comrades he'd lost, and the loneliness that sometimes came with his job. Lyra, in return, shared stories of her life as a princess, the expectations placed on her, and the weight of her duties. She spoke of her people's traditions and how she had always felt like an outsider, never able to meet their high standards. But there was one thing Lyra had never shared with anyone, not even her own people: her fear of being alone forever. She had always been told that her worth was tied to her ability to produce heirs, to continue the royal bloodline. But now, in the silence of space, with only Jack for company, she had begun to question that belief. Maybe there was more to life than the expectations placed on her. Maybe her worth wasn't defined by her ability to reproduce. Jack didn't have the answers, but he was there to listen. He never judged her or told her what she should feel. Instead, he simply offered a quiet presence, a hand to hold when the silence felt too heavy. One evening, as they sat together in the ship's small dining area, Lyra looked at Jack with a new kind of understanding. "You've been so kind to me, Jack," she said softly. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you for everything you've done." Jack smiled, the weight of her words settling in his chest. "You don't have to repay me. Just, being here with you is enough." And in that moment, as they shared a simple meal together, they both realized something important. They weren't just two people trapped on a ship anymore. They had become something more: partners, equals, and friends who had learned to depend on each other. The future was still uncertain, and the dangers of the ship were far from over, but for the first time since they had met, Jack felt a sense of peace. They would face whatever came next together. The days were blending together now, and Jack had almost lost track of time. Lyra and he had settled into a routine, working on the ship's systems and getting to know each other better. They had come a long way from the first time they met, when everything seemed like an impossible challenge. Now there was a sense of calm between them, an understanding that made the quiet moments feel a little less lonely, but the ship was far from fixed, and they were still no closer to figuring out how to escape. The control room they had been working in had started to feel like a maze of alien technology. No matter how many buttons Jack pressed or systems Lyra adjusted, they couldn't seem to get the ship back to full function. There were still so many parts that were unresponsive, and neither of them could figure out what had caused the failure. One afternoon, as Jack sat at the console trying to make sense of a new set of data, Lyra approached him. Her face was thoughtful, and there was something in her eyes that told Jack she had made a decision. "Jack," she said softly, "I think I know what's wrong with the ship." Jack looked up at her, surprised. "You do?" Lyra nodded. "I've been going through the ship's records. There's something I didn't tell you before. The ship was not just a transport vessel. It was a warship." Jack's eyes widened. A warship? That was unexpected. He had assumed the ship was some kind of peaceful exploration vessel, one designed to study space or transport cargo. A warship meant something entirely different. "A warship?" he repeated. "But I thought your people weren't at war." Lyra's face darkened as she shook her head. "We weren't, not for a long time. But there were enemies, rivals, who wanted to take control of our resources. My people, we weren't prepared for what happened. This ship was part of a fleet that was meant to protect us, but something went wrong." Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. The idea of being trapped on a warship, with no idea who might be looking for it, suddenly felt a lot more dangerous. He could imagine the enemy ships, armed to the teeth, searching for any sign of this ship to finish what they had started. "What happened to the rest of the fleet?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear that was slowly rising inside. They were destroyed," Lyra said quietly. "By the time I was sent on this ship, the war had already taken a terrible toll on my people. We had to retreat, but not everyone made it out. I was supposed to be part of a new strategy, too. Fight back, but now I'm the only one left." Jack's heart sank. He hadn't realized how much weight Lyra had been carrying. She wasn't just a princess abandoned by her people. She was the last hope of a dying empire, and her people had left her to fight. Alone, the sadness in her eyes was something he couldn't ignore. "We can still fix this," Jack said, his voice firm. "We'll figure it out, Lyra. We'll get you back to your people. We won't let the ship be the end of your story." Lyra looked at him with a small smile, though it was tinged with sadness. "I don't know if it's possible, Jack. The warship systems are beyond what any of my people can fix now. The last of the fleet's engineers were killed long ago. I think that's why this ship was left behind." Jack didn't want to give up. He had never been the type of person to stop when things got tough. If there was any way to get them out of here, he was going to find it. "You said you've been going through the records?" he said, trying to get back on track. "Maybe there's something in there that can help us." Lyra nodded and walked over to the ship's main data console. She tapped a few buttons and the screen lit up with streams of alien code. "I've been looking at the log files," she said, her fingers moving quickly across the controls, "but they're encrypted. I can only access the basic information. The real answers are locked away." Jack frowned, his mind racing. "Is there a way to break the encryption?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "There might be. It's a long shot, but if we can access the main core of the ship, I might be able to decrypt the files. But that's easier said than done." Jack stood up, determination flooding his veins. "Then we'll get to the core. We'll do whatever it takes." Lyra looked at him, the tiniest flicker of hope in her eyes. "You would help me with this? Even knowing the danger?" Jack smiled slightly, the feeling of being needed making his chest swell with a sense of purpose. "We're in this together. I won't leave you behind." Together, they began to make their way through the ship, moving down dark, unfamiliar corridors. The ship was still eerily silent, and the air felt colder the deeper they went. Jack's footsteps echoed in the long hallways, and the distant hum of the ship's systems was the only sound that filled the void. As they reached a large, sealed door, Lyra stopped. "This is it," she said. "Behind this door is the core. We'll need to bypass the security systems to get in." Jack nodded, preparing for whatever came next. They had come this far, and he wasn't about to let fear stop them now. The door hissed as it opened, revealing a vast chamber filled with alien machinery. Lights flickered on, and the walls were lined with strange consoles and glowing pipes. Lyra moved quickly, already knowing the path she needed to take. She tapped a few buttons on a nearby terminal, and the entire room seemed to come alive. For a brief moment, everything seemed to slow down. Jack felt his heartbeat quicken as they both realized that they were about to access something that could change everything. This was their chance. This was their key to survival, but as the room lit up, Jack's hand tightened around his weapon. There was a loud, unfamiliar sound, and Jack spun around, instinctively reaching for his sidearm. Something wasn't right. The tension in the room was palpable as Jack's hand hovered over his weapon. The sudden noise echoed again, sharp and mechanical. Something wasn't right. The ship's security system had been triggered, and Jack could feel the presence of danger closing in. He quickly scanned the room, but there was nothing in sight. Nothing out of place. Until the walls began to hum louder, and the lights flickered, Lyra's face went pale. "It's the ship," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "It's not just a warship. It's a trap." The moment we accessed the core, it activated the ship's defense system. "We're not alone here." Jack stepped forward, his mind racing. They were in the heart of the ship now, and it seemed the ship was starting to fight back. His instincts kicked in, and he scanned the room again, his eyes darting from corner to corner. "We need to get out of here, now." Lyra nodded, her eyes wide, but there was something more in her gaze, something Jack couldn't quite place. The ship seemed to have a life of its own now, as if it were alive, responding to the presence of intruders. The machines around them hummed with energy, and Jack could almost feel the walls pulsing as the ship's systems powered up. Suddenly, the door that led into the core chamber slammed shut with a loud clang. Jack rushed toward it, attempting to pry it open, but it was sealed tightly. He turned to Lyra, who was already moving to another terminal, trying to bypass the security lockdown. We need to find another way out, she said, her fingers flying over the alien keys with speed and precision. This ship was never meant to be used by outsiders. It's not just the defenses. It's the ship itself. It's alive. Jack's eyes widened at her words. Alive? Yes, Lyra replied, her voice strained as she worked. The ship is designed to protect itself from invaders. It uses an advanced biosystem that adapts to any threat. That's why we haven't been able to fix it completely. It's not just technology we're dealing with. It's a living, breathing warship. Jack cursed it under his breath. The situation was far worse than he had imagined. They weren't just dealing with a malfunctioning ship. They were dealing with a sentient warship, and if it considered them threats, they had to get out before it decided to eliminate them. Completely, the air in the room grew colder, and Jack could feel a chill on his skin. The walls seemed to grow closer, the hum of the ship vibrating through his body. Lyra worked faster, but her face was full of frustration. I can't break the lock, she said, her voice filled with desperation. This ship is reacting to us. It's blocking everything I try to do. Jack's heart raced. They had to find another way out. We're running out of time, he said, glancing at the ceiling where strange lights were beginning to pulse. Signaling that the ship was preparing to defend itself, Lyra turned to him, her face resolute. I know another way, she said, and for the first time there was a spark of hope in her eyes. Follow me. Without hesitation, Jack followed her through the dark, twisting corridors of the ship. The once silent hallways now echoed with strange noises, clicks and whirs, like the ship was alive, shifting and moving around them. Jack kept his weapon drawn, ready for anything. Every corner they turned, every hallway they passed, felt like an obstacle, but Lyra moved with purpose, as if she knew exactly where she was going. Finally, they reached an elevator shaft at the far end of the ship. The doors were shut tight, but Lyra quickly found a hidden control panel beside them. She pressed a series of buttons, and the doors creaked open, revealing a narrow lift that seemed to stretch endlessly downward. We're not safe yet, Lyra said, glancing back at Jack. The ship will try to stop us. We need to reach the escape pods. Jack nodded, trying to ignore the feeling of dread crawling up his spine. He could feel the ship's sentient power in the air, its pulse like a heartbeat, closing in on them. He wasn't sure how much longer they had before the ship decided they were a threat to its existence. The lift descended with a soft hum, but it wasn't long before they heard the sound of metal scraping on metal. The walls of the shaft seemed to shift, and suddenly the elevator jolted to a stop. The lights flickered and went out, leaving them in total darkness. Get ready, Jack shouted as he felt the tension in the air rise. He could hear something moving above them, something large and menacing. Lyra's breath was quick and shallow, but she stayed calm. The ship's defenses are here, she said, her voice steady despite the situation. We need to keep moving. We can't let it trap us. Double quotes. Jack reached for his communicator, but it was dead. They were cut off from the outside world. The ship had locked them in, and it wasn't going to let them go without a fight. We need to get to the escape pods. It's our only chance, Lyra said, her eyes scanning the darkness. Follow me. Jack did his best to follow her, his hand on her shoulder to keep close in the thick blackness. Every step felt heavier, every sound amplified in the silence of the lift. The strange metallic sounds from above continued to echo, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the lift came to a stop, and they stepped out into another dark hallway. Lyra moved quickly, her steps sure, and Jack followed, trusting her completely. He knew they couldn't stop now. There was only one way out, through the escape pods, and they had to reach them before the ship did anything else to stop them. As they moved forward, Jack couldn't help but wonder what the future held. The ship was more dangerous than he had ever imagined, and Lyra's people, he could only hope they would make it out of this alive. The escape pods were still a few hallways away, and the tension in the air was thick as Jack and Lyra hurried down the corridors of the alien warship. The hum of the ship's defensive systems grew louder, almost like a heartbeat, and Jack could feel the walls vibrating beneath his feet. The sense of being hunted was real now. Every corner they turned, every door they passed, seemed to be closing in on them. The ship had become a living, breathing thing, and it wasn't going to let them escape easily. Lyra moved quickly, but Jack could tell that she was starting to tire. The long hours of navigating the ship, the constant fear of being caught, and the overwhelming responsibility she felt were taking their toll. He could see the way her shoulders slumped a little with each step, but she kept her eyes forward, never slowing down. She was determined, and Jack admired that about her. "We're almost there," she said, her voice low but steady. She had said those words more than once in the past few hours, but this time Jack could hear the conviction in them. She believed it. And that made him believe it too. As they approached another door, Jack noticed the flashing red lights on the side. The ship was on high alert, and the countdown to activation was getting closer. He felt the weight of the situation pressing on him. If they didn't reach the escape pod soon, it might be too late. "Do you think the escape pods are still functional?" Jack asked, his voice tense. Lyra didn't answer immediately. She reached for the door control and swiped her hand across the panel. "They should be," she said finally. "But there's no way to know for sure until we get there." Jack nodded, understanding the uncertainty in her words. They had been lucky so far, but luck could only get them so far. The ship was ancient, a relic of a war that had ended long before Jack had even known about it. No one knew how long it had been abandoned, or what kind of dangers it still held within its walls. The door slid open with a hiss, and they stepped into another long hallway. At the far end, Jack could just make out the silhouette of the escape pod bay. His heart raced as they pushed forward, their footsteps quickening with each passing second, but then a loud screech rang out from the walls, and the ship seemed to come alive around them. The lights above flickered, and a strange whirring noise filled the air. Jack turned to Lyra, his eyes wide with alarm. "What's happening?" "The ship's core is activating," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "It's preparing to seal us in. We have to move faster." Jack didn't need to be told twice. They broke into a run, pushing through the hallway with everything they had. The sound of the ship's defenses grew louder, and Jack could hear the heavy thud of machinery moving above them. Something was coming, something big. As they reached the door to the escape pod bay, Jack grabbed the handle and pulled. But the door didn't open. His heart sank as he yanked harder, but it remained sealed tight. Lyra rushed forward, her fingers flying over the control panel, trying to override the lock. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice shaking. "The ship is shutting everything down. Come on." Jack growled under his breath, stepping back to help her. He couldn't let this be the end. They had come too far. With one last press of a button, the door gave way, and they stepped into the escape pod bay. But as they looked around, their hopes began to fade. The room was a mess. Several of the pods had been damaged beyond repair, and only a few remained intact. The ship's attack had clearly taken its toll on everything. Lyra moved quickly, her eyes scanning the room. "There should be one more intact pod," she muttered. "It's over there." Jack followed her, but as they reached the last pod, a loud mechanical screech echoed through the room, and the walls began to close in. The ship was coming for them. Lyra scrambled to open the pod, but the door was stuck. Jack grabbed her arm, pulling her back as sparks flew from the terminal she had been working on. The ship's defenses were here, and it wasn't going to let them leave without a fight. "We have to get in now," Jack shouted, his voice urgent. Lyra pushed against the door one last time, and with a hiss it finally opened. The inside of the pod was small, but it was their only chance. Without hesitation, Jack pulled her inside, and they both strapped themselves in as the pod door slammed shut. The moment they were sealed inside, the pod began to lift off the floor. Jack felt a jolt as it separated from the ship, and they were sent into the cold, endless void of space. He glanced over at Lyra, who was breathing heavily, her face pale but determined. "We did it," she whispered, her voice full of disbelief. "We're free," Jack nodded, but his mind was still racing. They had escaped, but where would they go now? They were alone in space, with no idea of where the nearest colony was or how long they would survive out here. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Jack allowed himself a moment to relax. They had made it out. They were alive. Where do we go from here? Jack asked, his voice low as he glanced at the controls of the escape pod. Lyra looked out into the vastness of space, her eyes filled with both uncertainty and hope. Wherever we go together, she said softly, and for Jack, that was enough. The escape pod drifted silently through space, its small engine hummed the only sound. In the otherwise peaceful void, Jack stared out the small window, his eyes lost in the vastness of space. He had been through so much in the past few days, and yet he still couldn't fully grasp the reality of their situation. They were alone now, no longer trapped aboard the alien warship, but the uncertainty of their future weighed heavily on him. Lyra sat quietly beside him, her hands resting in her lap. She had been quiet ever since they had left the ship behind, her face turned toward the stars, deep in thought. Jack could see the emotions swirling inside her: confusion, sadness, and something else. Maybe it was hope. He wasn't sure. But what he did know was that she was no longer the princess he had first met, lost and broken. She had changed. They both had. "Are you okay?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, unsure of how she would respond. Lyra turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze. There was something different in her eyes now, a softness, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. She nodded, but Jack could see that. She wasn't entirely sure of the answer herself. "I don't know," she replied, her voice quiet. "I've spent so much of my life focused on what I was supposed to be, who I was supposed to be for my people. And now, everything feels ... different. I don't know what comes next." Jack reached out, gently placing a hand on hers. He didn't know what the future held for either of them, but he knew one thing for sure: they weren't alone anymore. They had each other, and that was more than they had ever expected when they first set foot on that ship. "We'll figure it out," Jack said, trying to offer some comfort. "We don't have to know everything right now. We have time." Lyra's eyes flickered toward him, and for a moment he thought she might say something more. But then she looked away, out into the stars. "I've always had to be someone else. The perfect princess, the one who could save her people. I never allowed myself to think about what I wanted, about who I really am. Now I feel ... Jack knew that feeling all too well. As a soldier, he had spent years being someone he wasn't, forced to follow orders, do things that didn't always align with what he believed in. But here, with Lyra, it felt different. Here they didn't have to pretend. They could be who they were without the weight of expectations holding them down. "You don't have to figure it all out at once," Jack said gently. "You can take your time. We both can." Lyra met his gaze again, her expression softer this time. "I've spent so much time running away from my own feelings. But now I think I'm starting to understand what it means to feel ... free." Jack smiled slightly, though there was a sadness in his heart as well. He didn't know where they would go from here, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. They had survived the ship together, and they had made it out alive, but the journey was far from over. They still had so much to figure out, so many unknowns ahead of them, and yet he wasn't afraid anymore. He had Lyra by his side, and that was enough. "What will you do now?" Jack asked, his voice quiet but filled with curiosity. Lyra paused, considering his question. "I don't know yet. I think I need to learn who I am without my title, without the weight of my people's expectations. But maybe there's a place for me in this universe, somewhere I can be free." Jack nodded, understanding the complexity of her words. "You've got time to find that place," he said. "And if you want, I'll be there with you." She turned to him, and for a moment it felt like the entire universe had stopped. In that moment, Jack realized that he had never truly been alone, not since they had met. They were both survivors, each carrying a heavy burden, but now they shared it together. "Thank you, Jack," Lyra said, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. "For everything." Jack didn't know what the future held, but in that moment he didn't need to. He had found something more valuable than any mission or title. He had found someone he could trust, someone who had become his equal. Together, They would figure out the next step of their journey. The escape pod continued to drift through the quiet of space, but now it no longer felt like a prison. It was a new beginning. Jack looked at Lyra, a sense of calm settling over him. They had escaped the warship, but their true adventure was just beginning. As the stars stretched out before them, Jack felt a renewed sense of hope. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The future might have been uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't seem so frightening. Lyra smiled at him, and Jack couldn't help but return the smile. They were no longer just a soldier and a princess, they were partners, bound by a shared experience and a promise to each other. And as long as they had that, they could face anything.